Jake walked down the quiet street of his neighborhood, the sun beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the pavement. He had just finished a long day at work and was looking forward to a peaceful evening at home, maybe catching up on some TV or reading a good book. The world felt calm and normal, nothing out of the ordinary. But then came the shift, a strange hum in the air. At first, he thought it was just a passing plane or some distant noise from the city. But it was different, sharper, more intense. The air felt heavy, like something was pressing in on him from all sides. He stopped in his tracks, his mind racing, trying to make sense of it, when without warning the ground beneath his feet seemed to vanish. His heart lurched as he found himself rising off the ground. Panic surged through him, but before he could even react, everything went dark. It was as if the world had folded in on itself, and when his vision returned, he was no longer in his neighborhood or even in the city, but in a vast metallic space. His eyes adjusted to the strange light, his mind trying to catch up to the impossible situation around him. Towering walls of strange materials stretched into the distance, and the air had a strange sharpness to it. The very atmosphere felt artificial yet breathable. He staggered back in shock. What was happening? Where was he? Had he been abducted? Was this some kind of dream? No, this was real. The panic started to set in as he realized he had no control, no idea where he was, no way of knowing how to get back to his life, back to Earth. Suddenly, a loud mechanical sound echoed through the space, and Jake spun around, his eyes darting everywhere, trying to make sense of the unfamiliar surroundings. A massive doorway slid open with a soft hiss, and out of the darkness stepped strange figures, their bodies sleek and alien, humanoid, but nothing like humans. Their skin had a silver sheen to it, and their eyes glowed with an unnatural light. They moved with purpose and confidence, but there was something unsettling about them, something that made the hair on the back of Jake's neck stand up. The beings seemed to examine him as if he were some sort of specimen. And then one of them spoke in a voice that echoed in his mind. "You are the prey." Jake's mind raced, trying to make sense of the words, but before he could react, the beings began to circle him. One of them raised a device, and with a sharp sound, the ground beneath his feet shifted again. A massive platform seemed to rise from the floor, and Jake was lifted into the air, his stomach lurching as his feet left the ground. "What do you want from me?" Jake managed to ask, his voice trembling. But he knew it was pointless. These beings didn't seem to care about his questions. They were looking at him with amusement, like he was some kind of entertainment. And that's when the horrible truth hit him. This wasn't just some random abduction. He was a part of some twisted game. To these beings, he was nothing more than an amusement, a plaything in their cruel little sport. And in that moment, Jake realized he wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for something much bigger than that. He was fighting for humanity's dignity and pride, even if he was the only one standing here on this strange alien ship against beings that thought they were above him. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he was lifted higher into the air, his mind still reeling from the shock of what was happening beneath him. The platform he stood on hummed with energy, and without warning, the floor beneath him shifted once more, sending him stumbling forward into a massive open arena. The walls surrounding him seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions, gleaming with strange lights and towering structures that seemed far too advanced for anything he had ever seen before. The air felt thick with tension as he looked around, taking in the sight of alien creatures moving in the distance, some huge and hulking, others small and fast, but all equally strange. Their eyes glowed with intelligence, yet lacked the warmth of anything human. As they looked at him, their gazes filled with curiosity and hunger. Before Jake could even think to act, the voice from earlier echoed through the arena again, this time more forceful and commanding. "Survive this challenge, and you may earn your freedom." The words hung in the air like a dark promise. Jake could feel his palms sweating as he tried to steady his breath, but the words still echoed in his mind. It wasn't a choice. He realized he had no say in this. He was in a fight for his life, and there was no way out. As if on cue, a series of massive doors at the far end of the arena opened, and out came what looked like a mechanical beast, its body covered in thick metallic plating with glowing red eyes and jagged claws. It roared loudly as it advanced toward Jake, every step sending a vibration through the ground that made his legs feel weak. He swallowed hard, trying to suppress the fear threatening to rise in his throat, But there was no time for fear, no time for panic. He had to move, and fast. The creature was fast, too far too fast for Jake to outrun it on foot. His mind raced, looking for any kind of advantage, anything he could use to fight back. But all he could see were the tall structures around the arena. Some of them seemed to be hollow, with small openings and ledges that could be used to hide or escape. But how would he get there before the beast caught up with him? Jake didn't have the luxury of thinking long. He took a deep breath and sprinted toward the nearest structure, dodging the creature's first strike. As it slashed the air with its claws, the sound of the strike buzzing past him like a near miss made his heart skip a beat. The beast roared again and charged. He leaped for the ledge above him, just as the creature's claws raked across the ground below his feet, sending sparks flying. Jake's body slammed into the wall as he clung to the ledge, his heart racing. But the beast wasn't far behind. It began to climb after him with terrifying speed and force. Jake's survival instincts kicked into overdrive as he scrambled higher, the beast snapping at his heels with each passing second. And then he spotted it, a loose piece of debris from the wreckage of the arena structures, a large metallic rod half buried beneath rubble. The creature was just beneath him. Now Jake's hand shot out and grabbed the rod, lifting it with all his strength. He turned his body quickly and hurled the makeshift weapon straight down at the beast's exposed underbelly. The rod plunged deep into the creature's side, and it howled in pain as it recoiled back. For a moment, Jake seized the opportunity and made a final leap toward a higher platform. The creature thrashed and growled, but it wasn't fast enough this time. Jake made it to safety, panting heavily as he realized the truth. The Zorvex were watching, not just from afar, but up close. They were studying him, his every move, his every reaction. And somewhere deep inside, he knew they would not stop until they had broken him. But Jake wasn't going to make it easy. He had just taken the first step in proving humanity's worth, and he would not be their plaything, not now, not ever. Jake didn't have much time to catch his breath before the next challenge was thrust upon him. The creature's shrieks echoed in the distance as it retreated, but Jake knew it wouldn't be long before something worse came his way. His heart was still racing, and sweat trickled down his face, but the adrenaline coursing through his veins was starting to give him clarity. This wasn't just some survival game for him. It was an arena of humiliation for his species, and he refused to play the victim. He surveyed his surroundings, scanning the towering walls, the scattered debris, and the unfamiliar structures around him. His mind was working at full speed now. He had to stay one step ahead of whatever the Zorvex threw at him next. If they wanted to test him, he would show them just how dangerous a human could be when backed into a corner. Before he could take another step, the ground trembled beneath him, signaling something big approaching. Jake quickly ducked behind a series of crates and peered out cautiously. The arena had been eerily quiet for a moment, but that didn't mean it was safe. He knew better than to think they'd just let him rest after one fight. As if on cue, a new threat emerged from the opposite end of the arena. A massive creature, even larger than the mechanical beast, lumbered into view. This one was organic, its body covered in thick, scaly hide, and its many eyes glowed with an unsettling intelligence. The creature's mouth opened wide, revealing rows of sharp teeth. It moved slowly but with a heavy, deliberate gait. There was no doubt it could destroy everything in its path if it got close enough. Jake's mind raced. He couldn't outrun this one, and fighting it head-on was a death sentence. He needed to think, adapt. He had no choice. The Zorvex voice echoed in his head once again, colder this time. Another test. Survive or perish. As the creature advanced, Jake noticed something. The arena's walls were filled with narrow ledges and gaps that were just big enough for him to slip through. His eyes locked onto one of the higher ledges, where he spotted a set of metallic crates stacked up against the wall. If he could make it there, he might be able to get the height advantage he needed. Without wasting another second, Jake sprang into action. He sprinted along the outer edge of the arena, using the obstacles in his path to break line of sight with the beast. His legs burned with every stride, but he pushed himself harder. Every second counted. The creature let out an earth-shaking roar, and Jake's ears rang with the sound of its pursuit. He didn't dare look back, but could hear its massive footsteps thundering behind him. It was gaining on him. He could feel the heat of its breath and the vibrations in the ground with each step. Just as the creature was about to pounce, Jake dove to the side, narrowly avoiding its jaws. He rolled and scrambled to his feet, his body aching from the impact. But he didn't stop. He needed to get to that ledge. The creature, frustrated by its miss, lunged again, this time with greater force, and Jake barely managed to dodge its claws. He could feel the air shift as the creature swung, the wind from its massive limbs knocking him off balance. But Jake refused to fall. With one final burst of strength, Jake leaped onto the stack of crates, climbing with a speed that surprised even him. He pulled himself up onto the ledge and paused for a moment to catch his breath, watching as the creature circled below him, growling in frustration. From his vantage point, Jake saw the arena in a whole new light. The Zorvex might have thought they could break him, but he wasn't like the others they had tested. He was resourceful, resilient, and he had learned how to use his environment to his advantage. The creature below him continued to search, but Jake knew its patience would wear thin soon. He had no idea how many more of these trials he'd face, but he was beginning to feel something powerful within him. The need to prove that humans could do what no other species had managed: survive, adapt, and fight back. As he prepared for the next step, he could hear the Zorvek's voice again, this time more subdued but still full of menace. "You are more resilient than we thought, but it won't matter. You will break." Jake smirked. "You haven't met a human yet." And with that, he braced himself for whatever came next. Jake's chest heaved as he crouched on the ledge, watching the massive creature below continue to circle in search of him. Every instinct told him to stay still, keep quiet, and wait for his next move. But a nagging thought gnawed at the back of his mind. He couldn't just survive. He had to show the Zorvex that they were making a terrible mistake by underestimating humans. He had to fight back. The creature below growled, its eyes scanning the ledge as it looked up at him. Jake felt the intensity of its gaze, but he didn't flinch. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. As much as he wanted to wait for it to leave, he knew that the longer he stayed in one place, the more vulnerable he became. This arena was not built for a quick escape. It was built to test him, to break him down piece by piece. Suddenly, the ground trembled again, and Jake knew that something else was coming. The creature below him roared in anger, its attention drawn to whatever was approaching. Jake's eyes darted across the arena, scanning for any sign of movement. But there was nothing. It was too quiet. The Zorvex had set a trap, and he knew it. Then, out of nowhere, a new sound filled the arena. A series of loud clicks and hisses, followed by a metallic screeching noise. Jake's heart skipped a beat as he looked up just in time to see a group of armed alien soldiers drop from the ceiling, their bodies encased in sleek, dark armor. They moved quickly, covering the ground with precise, coordinated steps. It was clear they weren't here to observe anymore. They were here to end this. The creature below let out a roar of rage, and Jake's instincts kicked in. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. Now it was about proving that he could make them pay for every second of pain, every moment of doubt. The Zorvex were not prepared for this kind of fight. They were used to beings that crumbled under pressure, that panicked when faced with certain death. But Jake wasn't like that. He had the will to win, and more importantly, he had the heart. As the alien soldiers advanced, weapons drawn, Jake made his move. He leaped from his perch with a wild, calculated abandon, landing behind one of the soldiers just as it turned its attention toward the beast below. His hands grabbed a loose piece of metal from the debris surrounding him, the sharp edge catching the light as he swung it with all his might. The soldier barely had time to react before Jake plunged the makeshift weapon into the vulnerable spot on its armor, sending it crumpling to the ground. The other soldiers shouted in alarm, their attention immediately shifting toward Jake. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed another piece of debris and used it to knock another soldier off balance. The others charge, but Jake's body moved like a machine, his every action quick and precise. The arena was no longer a cage to him. It was a battleground, and he was taking control. The creature below, realizing that its own chance for victory was slipping away, let out a furious howl and charge, tearing through the battlefield with terrifying speed. Jake didn't even flinch. He turned, and, using the chaos around him to his advantage, sprinted toward one of the tall pillars along the edge of the arena. His mind raced with possibilities. The Zorvex might have all the technology in the universe, but they couldn't replicate the one thing humans had: the ability to think on the fly. As the creature closed in, Jake scrambled up the pillar with an agility that surprised even him. He reached the top just as the beast lunged, its claws swiping at the air where he had been only a second before. His heart pounded in his chest, but his eyes were focused. This was his chance. He could see the arena from a new angle now, and he had a plan. From his perch, Jake spotted something that had eluded him before: a weak point in the arena's design, a panel that controlled the energy barriers that had been keeping him trapped. He didn't have much time. He had to take out the rest of the soldiers, disable the creature, and escape. With one last surge of strength, Jake leaped from the pillar, landing directly in front of the panel. He slammed his fist into it, sparks flying as the control system shorted out, the energy barriers flickering and shutting down. The Zorvex's voice echoed in the arena again, more frustrated now, more desperate. "This is not possible. You cannot defeat us." Jake stood tall, his chest heaving, but a smirk crossed his face. "You should have picked someone else." Jake's heart pounded as the last of the energy barriers flickered off, leaving the arena open. The Zorvex's grip on the situation was slipping, and Jake could feel it. The arena that had once felt like a prison now seemed like his domain, a space where he could outthink, outmaneuver, and take control. The remaining Zorvex soldiers, now realizing the danger they were in, scrambled to regroup. Their eyes flashed with a mix of rage and disbelief, and their weapons hummed to life as they advanced on him, their armor gleaming under the strange lights. Jake stood tall, unshaken, his muscles still coiled from the fight. He wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. But even as the soldiers moved in, Jake knew he couldn't fight them all at once. Not like this. His mind raced, scanning the arena for any advantage. And then he saw it: an array of large cylindrical tanks, scattered in various corners of the arena. They were filled with some kind of glowing liquid, their contents constantly shifting. Whatever they were, they had to be important, likely energy sources, or maybe weapons. Either way, they were about to be Jake's trump card. The Zorvex were getting closer, and the tension was palpable. One soldier in particular, a towering figure clad in dark, battle-scarred armor, seemed to be leading the charge. His eyes locked on Jake, the alien's expression unreadable but filled with clear intent. Jake could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just another fight. This was a message. The Zorvex were testing his resolve, testing humanity's limits, but Jake wasn't going to let them win. With a quick glance, Jake darted toward the tanks, his every movement precise and deliberate. The soldiers hesitated for a split second, unsure of his intentions. That was all the time Jake needed. He grabbed a long metal rod from the wreckage and jammed it into one of the tanks. The container groaned, then cracked with a sharp, thunderous sound. The glowing liquid spilled out, splashing onto the floor in a blinding arc of light. A loud hiss erupted from the liquid as it made contact with the air, the substance reacting violently. Jake didn't wait to see what happened next. He rushed toward another tank, smashing it open with the rod, and sending more of the liquid cascading onto the arena floor. The Zorvex soldiers shouted in alarm, realizing too late what Jake was doing. The liquid seemed to corrode everything it touched, eating through the metal floor and walls with terrifying speed. The soldier leading the charge raised his weapon, but Jake was already moving, sprinting toward the control panel he had seen earlier, now exposed with the arena's defenses offline. With every step, the arena around him seemed to pulse with energy, the very walls beginning to shift and buckle as the corrosive liquid ate through the structures. The soldiers were scrambling, trying to retreat from the advancing destruction, but they weren't fast enough. Jake's fingers hovered over the controls. He knew if he could destabilize the arena's core system, it could set off a chain reaction that would force the Zorvex to abandon the ship or risk losing everything. He slammed his fist onto the panel, his mind set on one goal. As the system cracked open, alarms blared, signaling that the ship's core was on the verge of collapse. The soldiers froze for a moment, fear flashing in their eyes. Jake felt a rush of victory surge through him. The Zorvex had underestimated him at every turn, and now they were paying the price. They were about to lose everything. The arena, the ship, all of it was falling apart. But the biggest surprise of all came next. The Zorvex captain's voice echoed through the arena once more, this time full of frustration and fury. "You think you've won, human," the voice boomed. "This is only the beginning." Jake smirked, not even pausing for a breath. "You've got no idea what humans are capable of." The Zorvex soldiers were retreating now, their plans unraveling in front of them. The once imposing arena, filled with advanced technology and unyielding defenses, was now a crumbling maze of chaos. The alien race had underestimated the one thing that made humans unique: their determination. And that, Jake knew, would be their downfall. The alarms blared louder now, the shrill sound mixing with the rumble of collapsing structures as the arena continued to disintegrate. Jake could feel the heat radiating from the walls as the Zorvex ship's core destabilized. The massive chamber around him was slowly becoming a death trap, the walls groaning under pressure as the weight of their arrogance began to crush them. The soldiers were retreating, but Jake could see the look in their eyes. They hadn't given up yet. The towering Zorvex captain was among the last to withdraw, his eyes fixed on Jake with a mixture of disdain and disbelief. Jake could feel the tension in the air. This wasn't over. Not yet. With the core destabilized, the soldiers had no choice but to fall back, but Jake didn't take his eyes off the captain. He could sense that this was their final confrontation, the moment that would determine whether he would survive, or whether the Zorvex would finally get their revenge. "You think this is victory?" The captain's voice echoed, his words cutting through the chaos like a blade. "You are a mere insect to us, human. You have only delayed the inevitable." Jake's grip tightened on the rod he was still holding. His pulse was steady, his mind sharp. "I'm not here to win a battle. I'm here to make sure you never forget who you're messing with." The captain snarled, and with a flick of his wrist, his soldiers disappeared into the shadows, leaving him alone with Jake. The arena around them seemed to tremble, as though the ship itself could sense the gravity of their confrontation. Jake stood his ground. The captain was larger than any of the soldiers, and his armor was formidable, but Jake had learned one thing in this hellhole: size didn't matter if you didn't know how to fight. The Zorvex had underestimated humanity, but Jake wasn't about to let them make that mistake again. With a swift movement, the captain raised his weapon, a sleek energy blade that crackled with power. He swung it with brutal force, aiming straight for Jake's midsection. Jake dodged at the last second, narrowly missing the blade's edge as it sliced through the air, its energy sizzling. The force of the swing sent a shockwave through the ground, but Jake was already moving. He had learned to anticipate their strikes, to feel the rhythm of the Zorvex's attacks. The captain growled in frustration and swung again, faster this time. Jake sidestepped, his instincts screaming at him to move faster. He didn't have the luxury of a second chance. As the captain swung again, Jake ducked low and used his momentum to slip past the alien's defense, landing a solid blow to the captain's unprotected side. The impact sent a shock of pain through his arm, but it didn't stop him. The captain staggered back, clutching his side. He wasn't used to this. Jake could see the surprise in his glowing eyes. For all their technology, The Zorvex had forgotten the one thing that made humans so dangerous: their adaptability. Humans could be knocked down, beaten, and broken, but they would always rise again, stronger, more determined. With a roar, the captain lunged at Jake, his energy blade flashing in a deadly arc. Jake's heart raced, but his mind was clear. He had one chance. The Zorvex's arrogance had blinded them, and now it was Jake's turn to make them regret underestimating him. Jake dove forward, using the momentum to grab the captain's arm mid-swing, twisting it with a force that sent the energy blade flying across the arena. The captain let out a roar of pain, but Jake didn't hesitate. With a swift motion, he kicked the alien's legs out from under him, sending the captain crashing to the ground. The arena around them was falling apart, but Jake didn't care. This was it. He wasn't just fighting for his life anymore. He was fighting for every human who had ever been underestimated, for every species that had been crushed under the weight of an alien empire. The captain snarled, struggling to rise, but Jake wasn't giving him the chance. He reached down, grabbing the alien's weapon and turning it on him. The Zorvex captain's eyes widened as Jake stood over him, his face determined. "This is for Earth," Jake muttered, and with one final push, he brought the weapon down. The room was silent, save for the distant rumbling as the ship continued to break apart. The Zorvex captain lay motionless beneath him, defeated. Jake stood, panting, victorious. The Zorvex might have thought they were invincible, but they had learned the hard way that humans were anything but easy prey. Jake stood over the fallen Zorvex captain, the weapon still humming faintly in his hand. He could feel the tremors beneath his feet as the ship's core continued to destabilize, the walls groaning like a dying animal. The arena was nothing but a crumbling shell now, the once pristine structure slowly being consumed by the chaos that had erupted within it. The Zorvex had underestimated him, but now they were learning a painful lesson. For a brief moment, Jake stood still, taking in the wreckage around him. His body was bruised and battered, his breath ragged from the exertion, but the fire inside him had never been brighter. He had fought to survive, and now he had fought for something bigger than himself. The Zorvex captain, their leader, was down. This was a victory. At least, it should have been. But even as he stood there, victorious, Jake knew it wasn't over. The Zorvex were nothing if not persistent, and this ship, this arena, was just one piece of their larger game. They were a race of hunters, and Jake had just taken down their best. But the others, those who still lurked in the shadows of their empire, would come. They would want revenge. The thought was cut off as a voice echoed through the wreckage, sharp and cold, like ice scraping against metal. It wasn't the captain's voice. This one was different, more calculating. "You think this changes anything, human?" The voice reverberated, coming from everywhere and nowhere all at once. It was the voice of someone who knew the game was far from finished. Jake's eyes darted around the collapsing arena, searching for the source of the voice, but he saw nothing. His pulse quickened. He knew what this meant. This wasn't just one Zorvex ship. This was a much larger operation, and they were aware of what had just happened. They knew the captain had fallen, and they were prepared for what came next. "Do you really believe that you can stop us?" The voice continued, dripping with arrogance. "We are an empire, a force of nature. Your resistance means nothing. The Zorvex are everywhere. Your planet is next." Jake gritted his teeth. His fingers tightened around the weapon in his hand, but he knew one thing. This was the moment that would define him. It wasn't enough to defeat one enemy. He had to ensure that the Zorvex knew that humanity wasn't going to just bend to their will. The Earth wouldn't be a prize to be hunted or a colony to be consumed. He lifted the weapon higher, the energy blade pulsing in his hand. "You think you can break us?" he called out, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "I've seen what your empire can do, but I'm not afraid of you, and neither is Earth." The voice fell silent for a moment, and for just a split second, Jake thought perhaps he had won. Perhaps his defiance had shaken them. But then the voice came again, darker, more menacing. "You have no idea what you've just started. You have no idea what the Zorvex can do." The walls around him trembled once more, and Jake could hear the unmistakable sound of engines firing to life, the low hum of alien ships preparing to leave. He turned toward the massive bay doors that had once held the ship's exit, but he knew it was too late. They were already preparing to make their escape, regrouping and calculating their next move. Jake took a step forward, determination flooding his chest. "I don't need to know what you can do. I only need to know that we're not giving up." He raised the weapon, a surge of confidence flooding through him. "And you're never taking Earth." The ship continued to shake, and Jake knew that the Zorvex might be retreating now, but this wasn't the end of their story. The fight was far from over, and he had no illusions about what would come next. But as the ship began to fall apart around him, Jake knew one thing for sure. Humanity had already made its mark. The Zorvex might have thought they were the predators, but they were about to learn that Earth wasn't just a planet to conquer. It was a species to reckon with. Jake ran toward the exit, his steps echoing in the crumbling space behind him. There was still much to be done. Earth wasn't just going to be left alone. And no matter how far the Zorvex retreated, he knew they would be back. But next time, he'd be ready. The ground shook with another violent tremor as the Zorvex ship continued to crumble around Jake. The once imposing structure of the arena was now little more than a maze of debris and twisted metal. The low hum of alien engines filled the air, the ship preparing for its departure. But Jake wasn't about to let them get away. Not after everything he'd fought for. He ran through the collapsing halls, his breath ragged but his resolve unwavering. The explosion from the destabilized core had triggered a chain reaction, and the ship was losing control, but that didn't mean the Zorvex were out of the picture. He could hear their shouts in the distance, the sound of boots pounding against metal floors as they scrambled to regroup. The Zorvex were retreating, but their thirst for vengeance hadn't been quenched. Jake knew it wasn't over. The bay doors loomed ahead, massive and intimidating, but Jake didn't hesitate. He could already hear the low whine of the Zorvex ships lifting off, their engines thrumming with the promise of escape. If they left, if they managed to get away with their arrogance, they'd be back. And next time, they'd bring reinforcements. Worse, they'd come prepared for him. His heart beat faster. He wasn't about to let that happen. Not today. Not ever. Jake sprinted through the wreckage, his mind laser-focused. He had no time to waste, no time for doubts. He had learned enough over the past hours to understand one thing. The Zorvex weren't invincible. They had underestimated him, underestimated humanity. They'd thought they could break him, humiliate him, but now they were learning the hard way that humans had an edge they couldn't anticipate. The will to fight, the drive to survive, and the ingenuity to turn any situation to their advantage. As he reached the bay doors, Jake slid to a stop, surveying the scene. Several Zorvex ships hovered just outside, their engines firing up. It was a chaotic sight, a flurry of activity as the soldiers scrambled to secure their ships. He could see the fear in their movements now, the same fear they tried to instill in him. They weren't in control anymore. Jake's eyes narrowed, and he grabbed a piece of metal debris lying on the floor. It was heavy, jagged, and had a sharp edge, but it was enough. He wasn't about to let these bastards escape unscathed. Not after everything they'd put him through. A Zorvex soldier stepped into his path, his weapon raised. But Jake was already moving, too fast for the soldier to react. With a swift motion, Jake hurled the debris, the sharp edge catching the soldier's shoulder. The alien staggered back, disoriented, but Jake didn't waste time watching. He dashed forward, using the chaos to slip behind one of the ships. The Zorvex soldiers were shouting orders, but Jake didn't care. He had a plan, and it was working. The bay was becoming a mess of confusion, with soldiers running in all directions. In the chaos, the ships were being prepared for takeoff, the Zorvex thinking only about their escape, but they hadn't accounted for him. Jake grabbed a piece of exposed wiring from the ship's control panel, quickly ripping it free and making a beeline for the nearest ship. He didn't hesitate. This was his chance. With a quick motion, he jammed the wires into the exposed terminal on the underside of the ship, short-circuiting the power systems. The lights on the ship flickered, then sputtered out entirely. The Zorvex didn't notice at first, too focused on their own escape, but soon enough, the alarm blared and the ship began to sputter and groan. The other ships quickly began to follow suit, their systems shutting down one by one. Jake's chest heaved, but he didn't stop. He ran to the nearest Zorvex terminal, using his newfound knowledge of their technology to disable every ship in the bay. Slowly, the Zorvex ships began to lose power, one by one, until the entire bay was silent. The remaining soldiers froze, eyes wide with realization. Jake smiled, a grin that was part exhaustion, part triumph. The Zorvex were stranded, their ships immobilized, their plans in ruins. The voice that had haunted him throughout the ordeal crackled again through the ship's comms, this time tinged with anger and disbelief. "You think you've won, human. This isn't over. You've only delayed your extinction." Jake didn't even flinch. He knew better than anyone that this wasn't the end. But it was a start, a powerful one. The Zorvex had come to Earth thinking they were invincible, that they could conquer and destroy with no consequences. They'd thought they could break him. But in the end, it was they who were broken. "You'll be back," Jake said aloud, watching as the last of their ships powered down. "But we'll be ready." And with that, as the wreckage of the Zorvex ship burned around him, Jake stepped forward, ready for whatever came next. Humanity had faced its first test on the galactic stage. And the message was clear. Earth was not to be underestimated.